Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a high-stakes survival guide for managing construction project finances. Look, if you're a quantity surveyor, a commercial manager, or anyone responsible for project's viability, you already know that actually managing the build, well, that's really only half the battle. The other half is managing the money.
Just listen to this quote for a second. It perfectly captures the chilling paradox of the construction industry. A contractor can be profitable on paper, but insolvent in practice if cash runs out mid-project. It's crazy, right? But because of how construction is structured, where you do the work way before you actually get paid for it, contractors are effectively financing the client. You can have a massively profitable margin sitting there on your final account, but if you hit a brick wall in month 3 because you literally cannot pay your subcontractors, that paper profit means absolutely nothing.
So, here's our structured toolkit for today. We're going to cover 1. The construction cash trap, 2. Anatomy of the S-curve, 3. Navigating payment lags, 4. Spreadsheets versus integrated software, 5. Updating the live forecast, and 6. Mitigating cash flow risks. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The construction cash trap, the mechanics of the gap.
Honestly, understanding this fatal trap is arguably a commercial manager's most vital task. The trap exists because there's a huge fundamental mismatch going on. On one hand, your cash outflows are immediate and they are aggressive. You've got labor wages and preliminaries flying out the door weekly or monthly, and materials demanding payment on tight 30 to 60-day terms. But on the flip side, your cash inflows are frustratingly delayed. You're just sitting there waiting on progress payments, interim certificates, and the eventual release of retention, which, let's be real, isn't happening until practical completion or even later.
So, this temporal mismatch creates a massive gap. The space between when you spend the cash to build and when the client actually pays you for that build creates a very strict financing requirement. And this gap doesn't just magically resolve itself. It has to be covered by company working capital, project finance, or overdraft facilities. Identifying and minimizing this exact gap is essentially what cash flow forecasting is all about.
Section 2. Anatomy of the S-curve, mapping the danger zone.
Now, to survive this gap, we've got to know when it's going to be at its absolute widest. Enter the S-curve. By definition, it's just a graphical representation of a project's cumulative value or cost plotted against time. It basically reflects the natural buildup and then the taper of activity on a site. But from a purely commercial perspective, you really should think of the S-curve as a visual valley of death that every single contractor has to carefully plan to cross.
Let's actually break down the phases of this curve. In step 1, the early days, the spend is pretty slow. You're mobilizing, setting up the site, maybe doing some piling. The negative cash is building, sure, but it's gradual. Then we hit step 2, the mid-phase. We're talking structural frame, M&E roughing, cladding. This is rapid spend, and this right here is your peak negative cash zone. This is where companies go under. Step 3 is late, fit out and finishes, where the spend finally slows down and cash starts to recover. And finally, step 4 is post-practical completion, where you cross the finish line into a cash-positive state with retention releases and final account settlements.
Section 3. Navigating payment lags, the survival simulation. Okay, so what does this valley of death actually look like in the real world? Let's run a quick survival simulation to see exactly how payment lags drag your balance down. Look at how fast the hole gets dug in month 1. The contractor has done 50,000 pounds of work, but income received, 0. Why? Because of that typical 4 to 8 week income lag. Your work is valued at the end of the month, certified 2 weeks later, and then paid a whole month after that. Meanwhile, 45,000 pounds already went out the door for labor and materials. Now look at month 2. They finally received 45,000, but remember, that's just the payment for month 1 minus a standard 5% retention deduction. And all the while, expenditure just ramped up to 90,000.
Which leads us directly to this genuinely terrifying number, minus 90,000 pounds. This is your cumulative balance at the end of month 2. We call this the peak negative position. It's the absolute maximum financing the contractor has to secure just to survive the project. Think about it. If your overdraft facility is only 50,000 pounds, you are technically insolvent right here, even though you're sitting on a profitable 600,000 pound contract.
But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. If you've done your forecasting properly as a QS and secured that £90,000 facility, look what happens. By accurately predicting and surviving that month 2 valley, you cross safely over into month 4, where the project finally hits a net positive cash position of £45,000. Survival in this game is all about foresight.
Section 4. Spreadsheets versus integrated software. Building your radar.
Of course, having foresight means you need the right tools to make sure your radar is actually accurate. The industry kind of splits into two main camps here. First up, we've got standard spreadsheets like Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets. These are definitely the most common. They offer total flexibility, you can build custom templates, and honestly, they're usually the best fit for individual projects and SME contractors. On the flip side, you've got integrated software. These heavy hitters link your estimating, your project planning, and your cash flow all together automatically.
If we look closer at those integrated options, you'll see tools like Candy, which is brilliant for medium to large contractors who need that integrated estimating. Then there are BIM-linked systems, things like R's, Prism, and CostX, designed for highly complex projects. And for those massive major infrastructure jobs, you're usually looking at Oracle Primavera P6. The real takeaway here is that as your data sets get massive and super complex, integrated software scales to link your schedule directly to your resources and costs. It completely eliminates those massive, terrifying manual errors you'd inevitably get trying to run a mega project off a basic spreadsheet.
Section 5. Updating the live forecast. Keeping the pulse.
Listen, regardless of whether you're a spreadsheet wizard or an integrated software pro, keeping the pulse of the project is totally non-negotiable. A forecast that's whipped up at the tender stage and then shoved in a drawer, that is essentially a useless document. It's got to be a living, breathing thing. Every single month you need to update it. You've got to check actual payments received against what you predicted. You have to factor in any revised subcontractor and supplier costs, and of course, you add any approved variations right into the overall value.
But here's the absolute biggest one. You must factor in the revised program for any delayed works. Which brings us to this incredibly critical warning from our source. A program and a cash flow that disagree with each other will mislead the commercial team. Think about it. If your construction timeline shows a 4-week acceleration, but your cash flow forecast hasn't been updated to reflect that sudden massive spike in spending, your commercial team is flying blind, straight into a cash wall. Alignment is absolutely vital.
Section 6. Mitigating cash flow risks. Tactical evasion.
Okay, so you've got your live forecast, and you can see that peak negative position looming on the horizon. What do? Well, here are your tactical evasion strategies. First off, where the contract allows it, front-load the bill of quantities. Price your preliminary items and early works higher so you pull cash into the project much earlier. Second, negotiate shorter payment terms right at the tender stage. Getting your certification and payment terms dropped from 30 days down to 14 days, that can literally save you tens of thousands of pounds in financing costs on a big job. Third, diligently monitor and track your attention so it doesn't just get forgotten the second practical completion hits.
And lastly, you absolutely have to stress test this forecast. I mean it. Always model a delayed payment scenario. What happens if the client pays 2 weeks late? What if it's 4 weeks? You need to know exactly what your worst-case financing requirement looks like before it actually hits your bank account. Because honestly, preparing for a disaster on a spreadsheet is infinitely cheaper than trying to navigate one in real life.
Which brings us to our final thought. The construction cash trap? It's very real. And frankly, it doesn't care at all about your final profit margins. So I'm going to leave you with this question. Your forecast might show a beautiful profit at practical completion, but do you actually have the cash to survive month 2? You've got to master your actual live cash flow, not just your paper profit. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep building smart.